The burger cost $15, but the little girl in the vibrant purple dress and neat pigtails only had 4. While the rest of the diners at the upscale grill froze in terror, Lilly stepped up to the counter, slammed her small fist down, and looked the cashier in the eye. Pointing at the most feared man in the city, she declared loudly, "I am paying for his burger." Kim Minley, the silent dragon of the underworld, dressed in a sharp suit with dark ink peeking from his collar, stopped mid-bite. No one had ever dared to charity him before. Baffled by her boldness, Minley watched as she didn't ask for change, but for a favor that chilled the room. She didn't want money. She wanted the Mafia boss to use his terrifying power to save her mother, Jasmine Bradley. In that moment, a $4 burger became a blood-bound contract that would force a killer to choose between his empire and his soul. If you love stories where the smallest voice can change the heart of a giant, hit that like button and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments, which city or country are you watching from, and what time is it right now? This is the $4 debt. The Golden Grill was not merely a restaurant. It was a cathedral of power where the city's elite whispered over linen tablecloths and Wagyu beef. The air smelled of expensive cologne, aged scotch, and the heavy, silent tension that always followed Kim Minley. He sat in the corner booth, the dragon's seat, a position that allowed him to see every entrance and exit without turning his head. Minley was a man of sharp, lethal angles, his charcoal suit tailored to hide the scars of a decade spent climbing to the top of the underworld. His dark hair was swept back with military precision, and a glimpse of black ink, the tail of a dragon, peeked from beneath his starched white collar. Across from him, his lieutenant, Sang, was briefing him on a betrayal in the shipping yards. Minley wasn't eating. He was staring at the gourmet burger on his plate as if he could divine the name of the traitor from the grill marks on the bun. The entire restaurant functioned like a clock around him, everyone moving carefully, terrified of making a sound that might break the silent dragon's concentration. Then, the bell above the heavy oak door chimed. Through the sea of gray suits and evening gowns walked Lilly. She was 7 years old, a tiny burst of defiance in a vibrant purple dress that flared out as she marched across the marble floor. Her hair was gathered into 2 perfect pigtails, secured by purple silk ribbons that bounced with the rhythm of her footsteps. She didn't look at the glittering chandeliers or the rich patrons who pulled their legs back in shock. Her eyes were locked onto the man in the corner booth. As she reached the table, Sang's hand moved instinctively toward his waistband. The air in the room turned to ice, but Minley raised a single, gloved finger. He didn't look up, but his silence was a command for Sang to stand down. "Excuse me, mister," Lilly's voice rang out. It wasn't trembling. It was clear, high-pitched, and filled with a strange, ancient authority. Minley slowly lifted his gaze. He had looked into the eyes of assassins and corrupt politicians, but he had never seen anything as piercing as the brown eyes of the little girl standing before him. "You're eating the dragon burger," Lilly said, pointing a small finger at his plate. "The lady at the counter said it's the best, but she said it costs $15. I checked my piggy bank." She reached into the small, heart-shaped purse slung over her shoulder and pulled out 4 crumpled $1 bills. With meticulous care, she smoothed them out against the edge of the mahogany table, lining them up next to Minley's platinum watch. The contrast was staggering, the dirty, worn currency of the streets resting against a piece of jewelry that could buy a city block. "I am paying for his burger," she declared to the room at large, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. A few patrons gasped, others looked away, certain they were about to witness a tragedy. Minley looked at the $4, then at the girl in the purple dress. A forgotten sensation, something sharp and cold like a needle, pricked at his heart. "And why?" Minley asked, his voice dropping into that low, velvety register that usually signaled the start of a massacre. Would a Bradley spend her last $4 on a man who has everything? Lilly leaned in closer, her pigtails swaying. "Because my mama, Jasmine, says you should never let a dragon go hungry when there's work to be done. She says you're the only one who isn't afraid of the men in the black vans." She swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I have a very big job for you, Mr. Minley, and Mama says a Bradley never asks for a favor for free." Minley felt the world shift. The name, Jasmine Bradley, hit him like a physical blow. He remembered a woman from the East District who had once saved one of his runners from a burning building, a woman who had refused his money then, too. "Sang," Minley said, his eyes never leaving Lily's. "Tell the kitchen to pack this. It seems I've been hired." He looked at the $4 on the table. "Lily, $4 is a very high price. It means that until your mother is safe, my life belongs to you. Do you understand what that means?" Lily nodded solemnly, clutching the straps of her backpack. "It means you have to help me find her." Minley stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow. "Then let's not waste your investment. We have work to do." The transition from the warmth of the Golden Grill to the interior of Kim Minley's armored limousine was like stepping into another dimension. The car didn't just drive. It glided through the city streets like a silent predator cutting through dark water. Inside, the air was chilled to a precise temperature and smelled of expensive leather, aged cedar, and ozone. Lily sat on the edge of the plush, diamond-stitched seat, her small legs dangling, her vibrant purple dress a stark, royal contrast to the black-on-black interior of the vehicle. She clutched the straps of her backpack to her chest, her eyes wide as she watched the neon lights of the city blur into long, glowing ribbons against the tinted glass. Minley sat opposite her, his expression unreadable, a mask of stone carved from years of hiding his soul. He had placed the 4 crumpled dollar bills on the mahogany console between them, arranging them with a strange, reverent precision. He didn't look like a man who had just been hired by a child. He looked like a general preparing for a scorched earth campaign. "Sang," Minley said, his voice dropping to that low, velvety register that made the heavy air in the car vibrate. "I want a full sweep of the East District. I want to know every black van that moved through those streets in the last 6 hours. If a single blade of grass was stepped on near the Bradley home, I want to know the size of the boot that did it. And check the ghost accounts. If someone touched Jasmine Bradley, they did it because they thought I was too busy with the shipping yards to notice. Make sure they realize that my eyes are everywhere." The car pulled into the private, high-security underground garage of a shimmering glass tower that pierced the city's skyline like a needle, the Dragon's Den. This was the nerve center of Minley's empire, a fortress where the digital and the physical underworlds met. As the private elevator doors hissed open onto the top floor, Lily gasped. The room was a sprawling expanse of chrome and obsidian, filled with floor-to-ceiling screens displaying flickering data, satellite maps of the city's shipping routes, and high-definition security feeds from 100 different corners of the district. Men in dark, expensive suits stopped mid-motion, their jaws dropping in unison as they saw the silent dragon walking through the command center, followed by a little girl in purple pigtails. The silence was absolute. "Everyone out! Now!" Minley commanded. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it sent a visible shiver through the room. Within 30 seconds, the massive floor was empty, leaving only the hum of the servers and the 2 of them. He led Lily to a massive desk carved from a single block of volcanic rock. "Now, Lily, you mentioned black vans. Tell me exactly what happened before you came to the restaurant. Every detail is a tool, and I need the right tools to fulfill our contract." Lily took a deep breath, her pigtails swaying as she spoke. "Mama was walking me home from school. We were going to get the grape ice cream because I got an A on my spelling test. Then the van jumped the curb. It was black with a silver scratch on the side like a lightning bolt. 3 men came out. They didn't have faces, just those black masks. One of them held a piece of paper and said Mama owed, the chairman for her father's old shop." Minley's eyes turned into shards of black ice. The chairman was the alias of Park De-young, a man who dealt in predatory loans and human misery. But Minley knew the truth. Jasmine's father's shop debt had been settled years ago in a deal he had personally overseen. This wasn't about a debt. It was a provocation. It was a kidnapping designed to test Minley's borders. "Mama told me to run," Lily continued, her voice small but steady. "She told me to find the man with the dragon on his neck and give him the $4, she said. She said the dragon always honors a Bradley contract because of the old days." Minley leaned forward, his gloved hand hovering near the $4 bills. "She told you to find me specifically." "Yes," Lilly whispered. "She said you were a man who remembered his debts, even when the world forgot." Minley felt a surge of a forgotten emotion. Duty. Not to his board of directors or his lieutenants, but to the legacy of a woman who believed in his honor even when he had discarded it himself. He tapped a command on his desk, and a holographic map of the industrial sector illuminated the room. "Park has a warehouse near the old docks," Minley narrated, his eyes tracing the red lines of the city's pulse. "He thinks he's hidden. He thinks he can use Jasmine as bait for a trap I won't see coming." He looked at Lilly, his gaze softening by a mere fraction. "He's half right. I am going there. But he doesn't realize that tonight I'm not fighting for territory. I'm fighting for a $4 burger." He stood up, pulling a silver briefcase from a hidden compartment. "Lilly, you stay here with Sang. This tower is the safest place on Earth." Lilly stood up too, her purple dress rustling in the quiet room. "No, Mama said a Bradley stays until the work is done. I'm coming with you." Minley looked at her, ready to command her to stay. But he saw the same ironclad resolve in her eyes that he saw in his own reflection every morning. "Fine," he whispered. "But you stay in the car. If things get loud, you don't look out the window. Do you understand?" Lilly nodded solemnly. The $4 debt was no longer a child's plea. It was a declaration of war. The industrial docks were a graveyard of rusted iron and salt-crusted shipping containers that loomed like monoliths in the dark. The moonlight struggled to pierce the thick coastal fog, casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. Kim Minley's black SUV moved like a ghost, its headlights extinguished, navigating the treacherous terrain using infrared sensors and the silent intuition of a predator. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with a lethal, focused energy. Lilly sat in the back, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack, her vibrant purple dress tucked neatly around her. She was wearing the noise-canceling headphones Minley had provided, but she didn't have the music on. She wanted to hear the city breathe. She wanted to hear the dragon prepare for battle. "There," Minley whispered, his voice dropping into that low, velvety register that signaled the end of a negotiation. He pointed to a corrugated steel warehouse at the far end of the pier, its edges blurred by the mist. Parked directly in front of the sliding bay doors, illuminated by a single flickering street lamp, was the black van. Even through the haze, the silver scratch shaped like a lightning bolt was unmistakable, a jagged scar on the face of the night. Minley turned to Sang, his eyes like polished obsidian. "The jammer is active. They have no outside communications. No one leaves that building. If they breathe, they do it with my permission. Secure the perimeter, but wait for my signal. This isn't just a raid, it's a statement." "And the girl, boss?" Sang asked, his hand hovering near the door handle. Minley looked into the rearview mirror, meeting Lilly's determined gaze. "She stays in the vehicle. The glass is ballistic grade, and the doors are magnetically locked. If I am not back in 10 minutes, you take her to the secondary safe house. Do not stop for anyone." Lilly pulled the headphones down around her neck, her pigtails swaying as she leaned forward. "You'll be back," she said, her voice small but as unshakable as a mountain. "I still haven't gotten my change from the $4. Mama says a Bradley never walks away until the books are balanced." Minley felt a rare, genuine smirk touch his lips. It was a dangerous, sharp expression. "A Bradley never misses a cent. I'll remember that." He stepped out of the car, and the temperature at the dock seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't carry a visible weapon, he didn't need one. His presence alone was a promise of absolute consequence. As he approached the warehouse, 2 guards stepped out from behind a stack of wooden pallets. They were armed with submachine guns, their faces hidden by tactical masks, but their stance betrayed them. They were shaking. Before they could even raise their weapons to level a shot, Minley moved. It was a dance of brutal efficiency. He closed the distance in a blur, his movements fluid and precise, honed by a decade of survival. A strike to the throat, a sweep of the leg, and the first guard was down before his heart could beat twice. The second guard fired a panicked burst, the bullets sparking harmlessly off the concrete several feet away, but Minley was already behind him. With a sickening, rhythmic crack, the guard's weapon was stripped and broken. and the man was sent spiraling into the shadows. Minley didn't slow down. He kicked the heavy warehouse doors open with a thunderous boom that echoed off the water. The interior was vast, smelling of diesel, damp wood, and fear. In the center of the room, tied to a wooden chair under a single, harsh spotlight, was Jasmine Bradley. Her face was bruised and her clothes were torn, but her eyes were twin fires of defiance, staring down the man who stood over her, Park De-young. "Minley," Park laughed, the sound jarring and desperate. "I knew the girl would find you. I knew your weakness for that old honor code would bring you right to my doorstep. Welcome to the end of your reign." Minley walked into the circle of light, his hands tucked casually in his pockets, his shadow stretching long and dark across the floor. "You kidnapped a woman over a $4 debt, Park. You've become desperate, and desperation makes you sloppy." "Sloppy," Park sneered, gesturing to the dozen gunmen emerging from the shadows of the shipping containers. "I have you surrounded. I have the woman, and by morning I'll have your empire." But Minley didn't look at the guns. He looked at Jasmine, who gave him a subtle, sharp nod. She wasn't just a victim. She had been counting the guards and timing the patrols. She was a Bradley, and she was already one step ahead. "Park," Minley said softly, his voice echoing like a tolling bell. "You think you lured me here, but you forgot the most important rule of the trade. I'm not here as a boss tonight. I'm here as a contractor, and I've already been paid." The flashbang detonated with a bone-jarring roar, turning the warehouse into a void of blinding white. Park's gunmen screamed, clutching their eyes as the silent dragon became a whirlwind of shadowed violence. Minley didn't use a firearm. He moved through the disorientation like a phantom, his strikes landing with muffled thuds. By the time the spots cleared from Park's vision, his entire security detail was incapacitated on the floor, and Minley was standing over Jasmine, slicing her zip ties with a sleek carbon fiber blade. "Go," Minley commanded, his voice a low, velvety rasp. He handed Jasmine a small transponder. "Sang is at the perimeter. The car is 60 yards due north. Do not stop for anything." Jasmine grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "Minley, it's a setup. Park is just a distraction." "I know," Minley interrupted, his gaze shifting to the dark rafters above. "That's why you need to get Lilly out of here now." Jasmine didn't argue. She sprinted toward the bay doors, disappearing into the fog. Minley turned back to Park, who was crawling toward a dropped weapon. Minley stepped on the man's hand, the sound of crunching bone echoing in the hollow space. He felt the rush of victory, the clean, sharp high of a successful extraction. He had saved the woman, honored the $4 contract, and dismantled a rival's ambush. But as he pulled out his phone to signal the final extraction, the screen didn't show the secure green light. Instead, it flickered red. A video feed automatically pushed to his display. Minley's heart, usually a block of ice, skipped a beat. The feed was from the interior of his own armored SUV. The ballistic glass, the glass he had told Lilly was the safest in the world, was shattered. Sang was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. And the backseat, where the girl in the vibrant purple dress had been sitting, was empty. "You think I'm the one in charge here, Minley?" Park wheezed from the floor, a bloody grin stretching across his face. "I'm just the bait. While you were playing hero at the docks, the ghost was walking into your tower. Your empire didn't fall from the outside. It was sold from within." Suddenly, Minley's earpiece crackled. It wasn't Sang. It was the voice of his second-in-command, the man who handled his digital ledgers. "The accounts are drained, boss," the voice said, cold and devoid of its usual loyalty. "And we have the girl. She's quite talkative. She keeps saying you owe her change from a burger. We've decided to keep her as interest on your life." Minley stood frozen in the center of the warehouse. The silence that gave him his name now felt like a shroud. He had won the battle at the docks, but he had lost his fortress, his wealth, and the child who had trusted him with her last $4. He looked down at the 4 crumpled bills he still carried in his breast pocket. They felt like lead against his chest. Everything he had built, the towers, the shipping lines, the fear, was gone in a single, coordinated strike. He was no longer a king. He was a man standing in a ruin, holding a dead contract. "Where is she?" Minli asked, his voice so quiet it was barely a whisper, yet it carried a vibration that made the metal rafters hum. "She's where the city begins, and your legacy ends," the traitor replied before the line went dead. Minli looked at Jasmine, who had stopped at the edge of the fog, realizing the car was gone. He saw the terror in her eyes as she realized her daughter was taken. The dragon had been lured out of his den, and now the den belonged to the wolves. The rain began to fall in earnest, a cold, needle-like drizzle that washed the blood from the warehouse floor, but couldn't touch the ice forming in Kim Minli's veins. He stood in the wreckage of his victory, a man who had just traded a kingdom for a ghost. His phone was a dead weight in his hand, the screen dark after the traitorous final words of his second-in-command. In the distance, the faint, haunting wail of sirens signaled that the authorities, likely tipped off by the same traitors, were closing in on the docks. Jasmine Bradley stood by the edge of the pier, her frame shaking, her eyes searching the empty, foggy road where the SUV had been parked. When she turned back to Minli, the hope he had seen earlier was replaced by a raw, jagged desperation. "They have her," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "Lilly, she's with them because she trusted you." Minli didn't flinch, though the words cut deeper than any blade. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out the 4 crumpled dollar bills. They were damp now, the ink slightly blurred. He looked at them not as money, but as a contract he had failed to fulfill. He was the silent dragon, a man whose word was supposed to be law, yet he had been outplayed by his own shadow. "They didn't just take her for leverage, Jasmine," Minli said, his voice dropping to that low, velvety register, though it now carried a gravelly edge of ruin. "They took her because they want to see if I'll burn the city down to get her back. My accounts are frozen. My tower is compromised. My men have traded their loyalty for a paycheck I can no longer sign." "Then what do we do?" Jasmine cried, stepping toward him. "You're the man who controls everything. Control this." Minli looked up, the rain slicking his dark hair back, revealing the sharp, predatory lines of his face. "I don't control the high-rises anymore, Jasmine. I don't control the ledgers or the police. Right now, I am a man with $4 and a debt that is overdue." He tucked the bills back into his pocket with a chilling finality. "But they forgot one thing. I didn't start in a tower. I started in the gutters. They think they've stripped me of my weapons, but they've actually just removed my restraints." He turned to the shadows of the warehouse. He knew there was an old smuggling tunnel beneath the pier, a relic from his early days before he was a venture capitalist. He grabbed a discarded iron pipe from the floor, testing its weight. It was a crude weapon, a far cry from the high-tech gadgets in his briefcase, but it was honest. "Go to the old cathedral on 4th Street, Minli commanded Jasmine. "Find the priest. Tell him the dragon is in the deep. He will hide you. I cannot protect you and find Lilly at the same time." "I'm not leaving without my daughter," she countered, her jaw set. "If you come with me, you are a target. If you go to the cathedral, you are a ghost," Minli said, stepping closer until he was inches from her. "I am going to find the man who broke our contract, and I am going to remind him why the city was quiet when I was in charge." He watched her hesitate, then nod, disappearing into the fog toward the city's edge. Minli didn't wait. He vaulted over a rusted railing and dropped into the dark, brackish water of the canal. He swam with a silent, rhythmic power, emerging a mile downstream in the heart of the East District, the slums where his name was still whispered with a mix of fear and reverence. He walked the neon-soaked alleys, a fallen king in a ruined suit. He had no car, no guards, and no backup. He walked into a low-rent gambling den, the kind of place he hadn't stepped foot in for a decade. The room went silent. The thugs and lowlifes stared at the silent dragon standing in their doorway, dripping wet and covered in the grime of the docks. Minli walked to the center of the room and placed a single, damp $1 bill on the scarred wooden table. "I need a name," he said, his voice echoing like a tolling bell. "I need the location of the ghost's safe house, and I need it before this dollar dries." One man, a scarred veteran of the street wars, looked at the money, then at Minli's eyes. He saw something in them that wasn't there when Minli was a billionaire. He saw the predator. "He's at the old mint, boss," the man whispered. "But he's got 50 men, you're just one." Minli picked up his dollar. I'm not just one, he replied. I'm the man who's already been paid. The old mint was a fortress of industrial decay, a hulking cathedral of soot-stained brick and reinforced concrete that had once pressed the city's currency. Now, it served as a tomb for secrets. Rain lashed against its jagged, broken windows, and the wind howled through the empty elevator shafts like a choir of the damned. Inside, the ghost, the traitorous second-in-command once known as Han, stood on the mezzanine, looking down at his small prisoner. Lilly sat on a crate of confiscated silver, her purple dress now frayed and coated in a layer of industrial dust, its vibrant color dulled by the shadows of the mint. The hem was torn where she had snagged it during the struggle, but her pigtails were still tight and defiant. She wasn't crying. Instead, she was staring at Han with an intensity that made the armed men around her shift uncomfortably, as if they could feel the weight of the contract she had signed with the dragon. "Why are you looking at me like that, brat?" Han snapped, checking his watch. "Your dragon is dead or in a cell by now. Nobody is coming for you." "You're wrong," Lilly said, her voice small but piercing in the cavernous room. "You didn't see him at the restaurant. He took my money. That means he has to finish the job. My mama says a contract with a dragon is written in stone." Han laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Kid, I drained his accounts. I took his house. I took his cars. In this world, no money means no dragon." Suddenly, the heavy iron doors at the far end of the mint didn't just open. They were torn from their hinges with a scream of tortured metal. The sound echoed through the chamber, silencing the guards. A figure stepped out of the swirling mist and rain. It was Kim Minley. He was stripped of his designer blazer, his white dress shirt soaked through and clinging to his frame, revealing the full, terrifying expanse of the black dragon tattoo that coiled around his torso and neck. He wasn't carrying a high-tech briefcase or a sleek firearm. In his hand, he gripped a heavy, rusted industrial chain he had pulled from the docks. He looked less like a businessman and more like a vengeful spirit conjured from the city's grime. "Minley," Han stammered, stepping back toward the railing. "How? I sent 50 men to the East District to finish you." "You sent mercenaries, Han," Minley said, his voice dropping to that low, velvety register that carried a lethal vibration across the floor. "Mercenaries fight for a paycheck. I'm here because I'm already paid in full." Minley moved. He didn't run, he hunted. The first 3 guards charged him, their tactical boots thudding against the concrete. Minley swung the heavy chain in a wide, shimmering arc. The metal whistled through the air, shattering a rifle and sending the first man sprawling. He didn't stop to admire the work. He stepped into the second man's guard, delivering a palm strike to the chest that sounded like a bass drum. The third man lunged with a knife, but Minley caught his wrist, twisted it until the bone gave a sharp pop, and used the man's own momentum to hurl him into a stack of empty crates. "Kill him," Han screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "I'll double your pay, kill him now." More gunmen emerged from the shadows of the old coin presses, but Minley was a phantom. He used the environment he had once studied as a young street brawler, sliding under catwalks and using the massive iron pillars for cover. He was a storm of focused rage, a man who had discarded the silent part of his name to let the dragon roar. As he fought his way toward the mezzanine, his eyes never left Lilly. He saw her stand up, her purple dress a beacon of hope in the gray, violent room. "Mr. Minley," she shouted, her voice giving him a second wind he didn't know he had. Minley wrapped the chain around his forearm, creating a makeshift iron gauntlet. He looked up at Han, who was now holding a handgun with trembling hands. "You told me that without money, I am nothing, Han," Minley said, stepping over the final fallen guard at the base of the stairs. "But you forgot. I started with nothing, and for $4 I'm going to show you exactly what nothing can do to a man like you." The mezzanine of the old mint smelled of copper and betrayal. Han backed away, his polished shoes clicking frantically against the metal grating as Minley ascended the final steps. The silent dragon was no longer silent. Every breath he took was a low, predatory growl that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. His knuckles were split, and the heavy industrial chain wrapped around his arm was stained with the dust of the men he had leveled below. "Don't come any closer," Han shrieked, leveling his pistol at Minley's chest. His hand was shaking so violently that the barrel traced erratic circles in the air. "I have the codes, Minley. I have the offshore accounts. I am the king now. You're just a ghost in a wet shirt." Minley didn't stop. He didn't even slow down. He walked into the line of fire with a terrifying indifference to his own life. "You have the numbers, Han, but you don't have the weight. You thought my power came from the bank accounts. You thought the men followed me because of the zeros on their paychecks." Minley stepped onto the mezzanine, the metal groaning under his weight. He was inches from the barrel of the gun now. He looked down at Han with eyes that had seen the birth and death of empires. "I built this city with these hands," Minley whispered, his voice dropping to that velvety, lethal register. "I bled for every inch of the East District, and tonight I'm working for a client who paid me more than you could ever steal." $4, Han laughed hysterically, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're dying for $4. "I'm dying for my word," Minley replied. In a blur of motion, Minley didn't go for the gun. He swung the heavy chain upward, catching the bottom of the railing. With a heave of his muscular shoulders, he ripped a section of the metal banister free, using the weight to knock the pistol from Han's hand. The gun skittered across the floor, falling into the dark abyss of the coin presses below. Han turned to run, but Minley was faster. He grabbed the traitor by the collar and slammed him against a massive iron pillar. The impact knocked the wind out of Han, leaving him gasping like a fish out of water. "Where are the transfer keys?" Minley demanded, his face inches from Han's. I encrypted them," Han wheezed. "If I die, the money vanishes forever. You'll be a pauper, Minley. You'll have nothing." Minley pulled the 4 crumpled bills from his pocket and pressed them against Han's forehead. "I already have everything I need. I have a fulfilled contract." Suddenly, a small, firm hand touched Minley's arm. He froze. The heat of his rage cooled instantly as he looked down. Lilly was standing there, her purple dress now tattered and stained with the grime of the old factory, yet still a brave smudge of color against the cold gray iron. She wasn't looking at the violence or the fallen men. She was looking only at the man who had come to fulfill her $4 contract. "Mister," she said softly, "Mama said the dragon always knows when the job is done. He's scared. You don't need to hurt him anymore." Minley looked at the terrified, pathetic man in his grip, then at the innocent girl who had seen too much. He realized that if he killed Han now, he would be the monster the world thought he was. But if he let him live, he would be the man Lilly believed he was. He released his grip. Han slumped to the floor, sobbing. Minley didn't spare him another glance. He turned to Lilly and knelt, ignoring the pain in his bruised ribs. "Lilly Bradley," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. "The perimeter is clear. Your mother is waiting at the cathedral. Our contract is almost complete." Lilly smiled, reaching into her backpack and pulling out a small, crumpled juice box she had saved. "You look thirsty, Mr. Minley. Dragons shouldn't be thirsty." Minley took the juice box as if it were a trophy of war. He stood up, taking Lilly's small hand in his large, scarred one. Behind them, the sounds of real sirens, the ones Minley had called through a secondary, encrypted channel, finally reached the building. The rain had tapered off into a silver mist by the time the black sedan, a backup vehicle secured by Sang, who had finally regained consciousness, pulled up to the towering oak doors of the old cathedral. The stone walls of the sanctuary looked ancient and immovable, a stark contrast to the shifting, treacherous world of the docks. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old wood. Jasmine Bradley was waiting near the altar, her face pale with exhaustion, until she saw the heavy doors swing open. Lilly didn't wait. She broke into a run, her once vibrant purple dress, now dusty and torn at the hem from the cold floors of the Mint, fluttering as she sprinted down the long aisle. "Mama." Jasmine collapsed to her knees, catching her daughter in a fierce, trembling embrace. They stayed like that for a long time, a small island of peace in the middle of a war zone. Standing at the back of the cathedral, framed by the moonlight pouring through the stained glass windows, Kim Minley watched them. His white shirt was torn and stained with the grime of the Mint, and his knuckles were raw, but he stood with the quiet, terrifying dignity of a king who had just reclaimed his crown. Sang stood behind him, nursing a bandaged head. "The traitors have been rounded up, boss. Hand's encryption keys were cracked within 10 minutes of his arrest. Your accounts are being restored, and the board has already issued a formal apology. The Empire is yours again." Minley didn't look at his lieutenant. He didn't care about the accounts or the board. He was looking at the little girl who was currently whispering something into her mother's ear. "The Empire was never lost, sang," Minley said, his voice dropping into that low, velvety register. "A man who keeps his word is never truly bankrupt." Jasmine stood up, holding Lily's hand, and walked toward the back of the church. She stopped in front of Minley. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only a profound, solemn respect. "You came for her," she said softly. "I told her you would, but I wasn't sure if the man I remembered still existed." "He didn't," Minley replied, his gaze flickering to Lily. "But a contract was signed. A Bradley doesn't ask for favors for free, and a dragon doesn't leave a debt unpaid." Lily stepped forward, reaching into the pocket of her purple dress. She pulled out a small, shiny object and held it out to him. It was a single, silver coin, a lucky token she'd found on the floor of the mint. "This is your change, Mr. Minley," she said with a serious nod. "For the burger. I didn't want you to think I was shortchanging you." Minley looked at the coin in his large, scarred palm. In his world, silver usually meant a bullet or a bribe. But this coin felt heavier than a gold bar. He closed his fist around it, a rare, genuine warmth spreading through his chest. "Our books are balanced, Lily Bradley," Minley said, kneeling so he was eye level with her. "But remember this. If anyone in this city ever mentions a black van or a lightning bolt to you again, you don't need $4. You just need to say my name." He stood up and nodded to Sang. "Ensure they are taken to the safe house in the north. Give them whatever they need. They are under the dragon's shadow now, forever." As they were led away, Minley stayed in the quiet of the cathedral. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 4 crumpled dollar bills Lily had given him at the restaurant. They were the most expensive bills he had ever earned, and he knew exactly what he was going to do with them. 1 year had passed since the night the old mint nearly became a tomb for the Bradley legacy. The city had changed. The shadows were still there, but they were governed by a different set of rules. The Golden Grill remained the center of the city's gravity, yet the atmosphere had shifted from one of cold fear to one of deep, respectful order. Kim Minley sat at his usual corner booth, the dragon seat, looking out over the dining room. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like armor, his dark hair swept back, his presence as commanding as ever. But on the table in front of him sat something that didn't belong in a den of power. It was a small, custom-made acrylic block. Encased inside the resin were 4 crumpled, worn $1 bills, the original payment that had turned a Mafia boss into a guardian. A silver plaque at the base read, "The most valuable investment in the city." It was a reminder that while empires are built on millions, they are saved by the truth. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open. Minley didn't need to look at the security monitors to know who had arrived. The rhythmic, energetic footsteps belonged to someone who walked as if she owned the world. Lily Bradley marched toward the booth. She wasn't wearing the dusty, torn garment from that night at the docks. Today, she wore a brand-new, vibrant purple dress made of fine silk, with matching ribbons in her pigtails, a gift from the uncle the world called the Silent Dragon. Behind her walked Jasmine, looking radiant and strong, now the director of a youth foundation that Minley had quietly established in the East District. "Mr. Minley," Lily chirped, sliding into the velvet booth with a confidence that made the surrounding bodyguards smile. "You're late for our meeting. Mama says time is money." Minley allowed a rare, genuine smile to touch his lips. "My apologies, Lily. I was just reviewing our year-end portfolio. It seems the Bradley investment is still the highest-performing asset I have." Lily reached into her small purple purse and pulled out a hand-drawn card. On the front was a drawing of a large black dragon with a little girl sitting on its back, both of them eating burgers. Inside, in bold, colorful letters, were the words, "The contract is forever." Minley accepted the card with more reverence than he showed for a billion-dollar merger. He looked at Jasmine, who offered him a nod of profound gratitude. They didn't need to speak about the past. The fact that they were standing here, safe and prosperous, was the only testimony they needed. "Sang," Minley said, his voice dropping into that low, velvety register. "Bring the dessert menu. I believe my primary shareholder has earned a celebration." As Lilly busied herself picking the largest chocolate sundae on the menu, Minley looked out the window at the shimmering skyline. He had spent his life as a predator, accumulating wealth that he couldn't take with him and power that only made him lonely. But for $4, he had bought something he never knew he wanted: a family to protect and a reason to stay honorable. He touched the acrylic block on the table. The $4 were still there, a permanent record of a deal that had changed his soul. He had built an empire from nothing, but his greatest legacy wasn't the territory he controlled. It was the girl in the purple dress who no longer had to look over her shoulder. The dragon had finally found his peace, not through fire, but through a debt that was, at last, perfectly balanced. The end. If you loved this story of honor, loyalty, and the power of a small voice, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Don't forget to tell us in the comments, what would you do if you had the dragon on your side? Thanks for watching.